The day I discovered that my own son had been using my credit card to pay for secret parties was also the day I realized that my kindness had become my greatest weakness. But my silence would be the most powerful revenge of all. Mom, dinner's canceled. Emily isn't feeling well. Those were the words my son, Ethan, said on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days before his 35th birthday. Words that sounded harmless, yet hid the cruelest betrayal a mother could ever receive from her own child. My name is Teresa Miller. I'm 63, and I live in Oregon, United States. For decades, I believed that kindness and generosity would be repaid with gratitude and respect. But I was completely wrong. My kindness became a weakness, and money the only reason I still had a place in my son's life. Ethan, 35, married to Emily for 6 years, used to be the center of my world. Since my husband, Robert, passed away from a heart attack at 54, I had poured everything, every dollar, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, into giving my son a better life than I had. I paid his college tuition, helped him buy his first home, and was always there for every important moment. That Thursday afternoon, when Ethan called, I was preparing to make chocolate pudding his favorite dessert since childhood. I had bought the best ingredients, just to make his birthday special. But his voice sounded strange that day, shaky and forced, like someone hiding something. He said Emily had a bad headache, didn't want guests, so the party would be postponed. I offered to bring her some chamomile tea, but Ethan quickly cut me off. Mom, really, don't come over. We'll just rest tonight. I felt uneasy. They had never canceled a birthday party before. Emily loved hosting, decorating, and making everything perfect. Strangely, just a week earlier, she had told me she was planning a surprise party for Ethan. On Saturday morning, the day of his birthday, I woke up with a heavy feeling. A mother's intuition told me something wasn't right. I decided to stop by the grocery store near their house, bought some fresh fruit, and planned to drop it at their door as a kind gesture. But when I turned onto their street, my heart nearly stopped. There were cars parked all along the block, people coming and going, carrying gift bags, balloons, cakes, and flowers. My pulse quickened. I walked closer and heard lively music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses from inside. There was no mistake. The sound of music, of celebration. It was all coming from my son's house. I froze at the gate. Ethan had said the party was canceled because Emily wasn't feeling well. But clearly, a full birthday party was happening, and I hadn't been invited. I pressed the doorbell. The music stopped instantly. A heavy silence filled the air. Then footsteps, whispers, and finally, the door opened. Ethan stood there, his face pale, his eyes filled with guilt, fear, and confusion. Behind him, I saw balloons. The dinner table set with wine and cake, and elegantly dressed guests awkwardly avoiding my gaze. It was the canceled birthday party. Ethan stammered, "Mom, this isn't what it looks like." "Some friends just stopped by," I interrupted. "Stop. Don't lie to me, Ethan. I've lived 63 years. I know when someone is lying." Everything, the decorations, the food, had been carefully planned. They had deliberately excluded me. Emily walked out of the living room, perfectly made up, wearing a new dress, smiling that fake smile. "Oh, Mrs. Miller, I'm feeling much better now." It was a last-minute surprise party. I looked her straight in the eye and felt my heart break. Not just because they lied, but because my own son could look me in the eye and deceive me without blinking. I quietly said, "I just stopped by to see if my daughter-in-law was feeling better. I'm glad you've recovered." Then I turned around and walked away, leaving behind the house filled with forced laughter. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked straight to the bus stop, strangely calm, because I knew from that very moment my silence would be the sweetest revenge. On the way home, I stopped at an ATM to check my balance. Something inside me felt off. When the receipt printed, my hands trembled. My account was nearly $2,000 short. I rushed home and pulled out all my recent statements, and that's when the truth unfolded. Large transactions. Liquor stores, upscale restaurants, flower shops, event planners, beauty salons. Every one of them paid with my card, and every one of them within the past 2 weeks. They had used my own money to throw the very party I'd been excluded from. I collapsed onto my bed, my hands trembling. It wasn't just about the money. It was humiliation, the loss of trust, the painful truth that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as a talking credit card. I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of anger. Angry at myself for being so blind. Angry at him for the betrayal. Angry that I had sacrificed my entire life for someone who didn't deserve a single cent from his mother's pension. But after the tears came something else: determination. Ethan thought he could take advantage of me without consequences, that I was just a weak old woman afraid of losing her son. He was wrong, very wrong, and he was about to learn who his mother really was. After discovering that Ethan had used nearly $2,000 from my card to fund the party, I stayed up all night. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of that betrayal, unable to erase the image of my son standing at the door, calmly lying to me. Sunday morning, I woke up with a resolve I'd never felt before. I gathered all my bank statements from the past few months, went through each transaction carefully, and what I found was far worse. It wasn't just recent expenses. There were dozens of small purchases scattered over months, hidden among my daily spending. Luxury restaurants on days he claimed to be working late. Gas stations with sky-high bills despite always saying he was broke. A drugstore charge for $200 when he said he'd borrowed money to buy medicine for Emily. Everything had been carefully planned. When I added it all up, the total came to more than $5,000 in 6 months. $5,000 my son had stolen, while I was cutting back on meals and stretching every pension check just to help him whenever he asked. Around 10 a.m., the phone rang. It was Ethan. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I needed to know what would he say. His voice was shaky, nothing like his usual confidence. "Mom, I can explain. There's a reason for everything," I asked directly. "Did you use my card to pay for last night's party?" There was a long silence on the other end, and finally, he admitted it. "I was going to tell you after the party." That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. Not just because he used the card without permission, but because of the cold calculation, the timing, the fabricated canceled party story, and the deliberate act of excluding me from a celebration my own money had paid for. I simply said, "We'll talk on Monday," then hung up. The rest of Sunday, I spent researching my rights, reading about cases of financial abuse within families in America. What I found opened my eyes. There were hundreds of similar stories. Children exploiting their parents, especially widowed women like me, mothers losing their savings, their homes, abandoned once the money ran out. And I realized Ethan's actions were a crime. Even though he was my son, using my credit card for personal purposes without consent was still considered fraud, financial abuse. The elder abuse law clearly defines this kind of financial exploitation, and what he had done fit perfectly within that definition. Monday morning, before work, I went to my bank in Portland. A teller named Amanda helped me kindly. When she heard my story, she explained that even though I had once given Ethan an authorized user card, If the charges were made without my consent, I had every right to cancel it immediately. She added that many American parents go through the same thing, giving their children a card for emergencies, which too often turns into unrestricted spending. Amanda advised me to have a serious talk with my son, and if necessary, consult an attorney. But first and most importantly, I needed to cancel the card to prevent further loss. I did it right there. When she asked for the reason, I replied, "Unauthorized spending by secondary cardholder." She noted it, printed the confirmation, and handed it to me. For the first time in days, I felt like I had regained control of my life. At work, my close colleague Martha noticed immediately that something was wrong. During lunch, I told her everything. Martha was furious and said something I'll never forget. "Teresa, that's not love. That's exploitation. He doesn't see you as a mother, he sees you as his personal bank." That afternoon, Ethan called again, this time at my office. His voice was calmer, but I could hear the anxiety underneath. "Mom, we need to talk. Please. It's urgent." He said he could explain everything, that it's not what you think. We agreed to meet the next afternoon, after my workday, at a small cafe downtown. I was a little surprised that he didn't want to talk at home, but then it made sense. Maybe Emily didn't want to see me after the embarrassment on Saturday. Or maybe Ethan didn't want her to know the real extent of his unauthorized spending. Tuesday morning, I prepared carefully. I chose a light gray business suit and buttoned a crisp white shirt underneath an outfit that made me look steady and strong. I knew this meeting would decide the future of our relationship, and I needed him to understand that I was no longer the naive mother he used to manipulate. I arrived a few minutes early and picked a quiet corner table somewhere I could see the door and talk privately. Ethan arrived 10 minutes late. The moment I saw him, I knew he was terrified. His hands were shaking, his eyes avoiding mine. He started with the words I had already predicted. "Mom, I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding on Saturday. The party wasn't even planned. Some friends just all lies." I had raised him for 35 years. I knew exactly when he was making things up. I let him finish, then placed a folder of credit card statements on the table. The charges were highlighted in yellow, clear and undeniable. "Explain these to me," I said, my voice calm but cold. His face drained of color. He froze, staring at the papers like they were a death sentence. And in a way, they were the end of our old, one-sided mother-son dynamic. Ethan stammered. "Mom, I used it only for emergencies. I was going to tell you. I'll pay it back." I pointed to each line. Liquor store, flower shop, event planner, upscale restaurant. Every lie he'd built came crashing down. Then he did something I'll never forget. He started crying. Right there in the middle of the crowded cafe. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of someone caught in their own deceit. Between sobs, Ethan confessed that Emily had pressured him to throw an extravagant party to save face with their friends, that they were drowning in debt, that he didn't want to disappoint his wife, and that he thought I'd never find out so soon. Watching my 35-year-old son cry, trying to justify stealing from his own mother just to please his wife, I realized I had lost my son long ago. The man in front of me was no longer the boy I had raised with love and sacrifice. I took a deep breath, gathered the papers, and stood up. I looked him straight in the eyes, his red and swollen from tears, and said calmly, "Ethan, you have until Friday to transfer $5,000 into my account. That's the amount you spent without permission." He protested, said he didn't have the money, that it was impossible to come up with it so fast. I replied, "That's not my problem. You should have thought about that before spending my money on parties and luxury." Then, I continued, my tone steady but sharp as steel. If the money isn't in my account by 5 p.m. Friday, I'll speak to a lawyer to see what can be done. Ethan stared at me, stunned. Are you serious? You'd really do that to your own son? I answered. You didn't hesitate to disrespect your mother like this. So, I'm learning how to protect myself too. I grabbed my purse, turned, and said one last thing. You taught me something, Ethan, that too much kindness becomes stupidity, and blind trust turns into weakness. Now, it's your turn to learn that every action has consequences, even when it's against your own mother. I left the cafe, leaving him sitting there alone with the statements, his late regret, and 3 days to find the money he had spent over the past 6 months, money earned from my sweat and tears. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control of my life again. On my way to the bus stop, I pulled out my phone and saved the number of a lawyer my coworker Martha had recommended. If Ethan thought he could keep treating me like his personal bank, he was about to learn that his mother still had a few surprises left. By Friday, the money still hadn't appeared in my account. At exactly 5 p.m., I opened my banking app. Nothing had changed. Ethan had ignored my ultimatum. They had used my own money to throw the very party I'd been excluded from. I collapsed onto the bed, my hands trembling. It wasn't just about the money. It was humiliation, the loss of trust, the bitter truth that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as a credit card with a voice. I cried, not from sadness, but from anger, angry at myself for being so blind, angry at him for betraying me, angry that I had sacrificed my whole life for someone who didn't deserve a single cent from his mother's pension. But after the tears came a different feeling, determination. Ethan thought he could use me without consequences, that I was just a weak old woman afraid of losing her son. He was wrong, very wrong, and he was about to learn who his mother really was. After discovering Ethan had used nearly $2,000 from my card to pay for the party, I stayed up all night. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of that betrayal, and I couldn't erase the image of my son standing at the door, calmly lying to his mother. Sunday morning, I woke with a resolve I'd never felt before. I gathered all the statements from the past months, scrutinized every charge, and what I found was far worse. It wasn't just recent purchases. There were dozens of small charges scattered over months that I hadn't noticed because they were mixed in with my own spending. Luxury restaurants on days he claimed to be working late. Gas stations with sky-high bills, despite always saying he was broke. A drugstore charge for $500 when he said he'd borrowed money to buy medicine. For Emily, everything had been carefully planned. When I added it all up, the total came to more than $5,000. Over 6 months, $5,000 my son had stolen while I was trimming meals and stretching every pension check to help him whenever he needed. Around 10 a.m., the phone rang. It was Ethan. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I needed to know what would he say. His voice was shaky, nothing like his usual confidence. Mom, I can explain. There's a reason for everything, I asked directly. Did you use my card to pay for last night's party? There was a long silence on the other end. Then finally he admitted it. I was going to tell you after the party. That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. Not just because of the unauthorized charges, but because of the cold calculation, the timing, the staged, canceled party, and the decision to exclude me from the very celebration my money had paid for. I simply said, "We'll talk on Monday." Then I hung up. The rest of Sunday, I spent researching my rights about financial abuse within families in the United States. What I read woke me up. There are hundreds of similar cases, children exploiting their parents, especially widowed women like me, mothers losing their savings, their homes, abandoned when the money runs out. And I discovered that Ethan's actions were a crime. Even though he's my son, using my card for personal expenses without permission is still fraud financial abuse. The elder abuse laws are clear about financial exploitation, and what he'd done fits squarely within that definition. Monday morning, before work, I went to my bank in Portland. A teller named Amanda helped me with gentle patience. When she heard my story, she told me that even though I had given Ethan an authorized card, if the charges were made without my consent, I had the right to cancel it immediately. She said many American parents go through this, giving a child a card for emergencies, which becomes permission to spend at will. Amanda advised me to have a serious conversation with my son and, if necessary, consult an attorney. But first, most importantly, cancel the card to stop further losses. I did it on the spot. When she asked the reason for cancellation, I said, unauthorized spending by secondary cardholder. She noted it, printed the receipt, and handed it to me. For the first time in days, I felt like I had some control back. At work, my close colleague Martha noticed immediately something was wrong. At lunch, I told her everything. Martha was furious and said something I will never forget. Teresa, that's not love. That's exploitation. He doesn't see you as a mother, he sees you as his personal bank. That afternoon, Ethan called again, this time to my office. His voice was calmer, but the anxiety came through. Mom, we need to talk, please. It's urgent. He said he could explain everything, that it's not what you think. We agreed to meet the next afternoon, after my shift, at a small cafe downtown. I had finished writing my final proposal, an agreement they couldn't refuse, but one that would permanently shift the balance of power between us. Ethan had always thought of me as his personal bank, but he was about to learn that every bank charges interest and requires collateral. Saturday was clear and mild. I dressed neatly, applied makeup, something I hadn't done in a long time. Carrying the folder of documents, I went to the very house I had helped them buy. Ethan greeted me with a forced smile, trying to sound friendly. Emily was warm and polite, pouring coffee and serving pastries. Clearly, they believed I was there to open my wallet and rescue them again. We sat in the living room. Ethan began explaining their recent struggles. The mortgage, the car payments, the cost of living. Life has just gotten out of control. Emily chimed in softly. Sometimes I think maybe we bought the house too soon. Maybe we dreamed a little too big. I stayed silent, only nodding. When their little performance ended, I opened my folder and laid the first document on the table, my credit card statement, with the unauthorized charges highlighted in yellow. I spoke slowly. Before we talk about any kind of financial help, you'll both need to explain these. The air in the room instantly changed. Ethan's face turned red, while Emily's eyes darted around, avoiding mine, searching for an escape. I placed the second document, the property deed, where my name appeared as cosigner. This means that if you two stop paying, I said evenly, the bank comes after me, and I have no intention of paying for a house I don't live in. Next, I handed over their credit report, listing every delinquent account. Ethan tried to justify it, saying it was just temporary, that things would turn around soon. But when I showed proof that they were already 2 months behind on their mortgage, the room fell completely silent. Finally, I pulled out the record of Emily's personal loan for $10,000. I asked bluntly, where did this money go? Because it clearly wasn't used to pay off the mortgage. Emily started stammering, saying she had spent it on family emergencies. That was when I presented my final proposal, the one that would change everything. I'm giving you two options, I said clearly. First, pay me back $5,000 by Monday. Clear all your remaining debts and never borrow money again. Second, I'll pay off every one of your debts, including the mortgage in exchange. You sell this house to me for the total debt amount and move out. Silence. Ethan and Emily stared at each other, their faces drained of color. Emily was the first to speak, her voice trembling. You're being unfair. Families don't treat each other this way. I replied coldly. Families also don't steal, lie, and take advantage of each other. I let you two treat me like a bank for years. Now, it's my turn to set the rules. Ethan said they couldn't possibly come up with $5,000 in just 2 days. I answered, you spent that much in a few months. You'll find a way to pay it back. As for the second option, I explained that if I paid off everything, they could still buy a smaller home, one that actually fit their means. Emily burst into tears. It's not fair. We'll lose our dream home. I looked her straight in the eye and said words I'll never forget. Emily, you lost your dream home the moment you decided to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford with my money. Now you have until Monday to decide how you want to handle this. I stood up, carefully gathered the documents, and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back and said firmly, oh, and if you choose to do nothing, then on Tuesday I'll meet with a lawyer to have my name removed as guarantor on this house. I'm sure the bank will be very interested to know that the borrowers are already 2 months behind. I left them frozen in silence. On my way home, I felt a strength I hadn't known in years. Ethan once thought he could manipulate, exploit, and dismiss me. But now he was learning that his mother knew how to play the game. And when she played to win. Monday morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. 15 missed calls, all from Ethan. It wasn't until the 16th that I answered. His voice was frantic, almost breaking. Mom, I need to see you right away. I have a proposal. I can't lose the house. I agreed to meet him at the same little cafe downtown where we'd talked before. This time, I deliberately arrived 15 minutes late just to let him taste what waiting, worry, and loss of control felt like. When I walked in, he was sitting in the corner, nervously tapping on his phone. The moment he saw me, he blurted out, Mom, Emily and I talked all weekend. We'll try to raise the $5,000. But please, give us more time. Just 60 days. I promise we'll pay interest. And I swear we'll never ask you for help again. I looked at him calmly, as if I were observing some unfamiliar creature, and said, the deadline's already passed, Ethan. Monday means today, not 2 months from now. If you don't have the money, then option 2 automatically takes effect. Ethan broke down crying. But this time, they weren't the fake tears he used to hide behind. They were tears of real despair. Between sobs, he said, this house is my dream, Mom. We've put everything we had into it. If we lose it, I don't know where we'll go. For a brief moment, my heart softened. After all, he was still my son, the boy I had raised alone after my husband passed away. But then I remembered the sleepless nights spent worrying about money. The humiliation of being excluded from the very party I paid for. I looked him straight in the eye and said, Ethan, you should have thought about the consequences before spending your mother's money on luxuries. Every action has a result, and right now, you're facing yours. I explained that with the money I'd used to pay off their mortgage, they could still buy a smaller apartment and start over without debt. Ethan shouted, That's not fair. You're ruining your only son's life over a misunderstanding. The word misunderstanding sent a chill down my spine. I replied firmly. Stealing $5,000 from your own mother isn't a misunderstanding, it's a matter of character. I stood up and said clearly, "You have until 5 p.m. today to make your final decision." When I got back to my apartment, Emily was waiting outside my door. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. "Mrs. Miller, I need to talk. There are things Ethan doesn't know. Maybe we can find another solution." I let her in, curious to hear what she had to say. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, tense, as if she might run out at any moment. She began speaking, her voice shaky, filled with shame and confusion. "Living with Ethan was exhausting," she said. "He was constantly stressed about money, and she felt pressured to maintain an image of luxury among their friends." Then she admitted something that stunned me. The $10,000 loan wasn't used for any emergency at all. She had spent $7,000 on clothes, shoes, handbags, and beauty treatments. The remaining $3,000 went toward paying off a credit card Ethan didn't even know about. I looked at the 28-year-old woman sitting there confessing that she'd lied to her husband, wasted, borrowed money on meaningless things, and was now begging me to clean up her mess. Her audacity was astonishing. Emily kept talking, between quiet sobs. She said she could sell her things to gather money, that she regretted everything and wanted to change. She asked if I could give them one more chance. For the family, for the future grandchildren. I answered evenly. "You should have thought about your family before lying to your husband and spending borrowed money on luxury. If you want to sell your things to pay it back, do it. But it doesn't change my decision." She began crying harder, saying that if they lost the house, Ethan would fall apart, maybe even become depressed, or do something drastic. A blatant emotional blackmail using my motherly love to manipulate me. I stared at her, and for the first time in my life, I felt a cold, steady anger run through me. "If you truly cared about Ethan," I said, my voice like ice, "you would have thought about that before spending money that wasn't yours and pushing him to steal from his own mother to throw parties." Emily left in tears, but I felt no sympathy. She had tried to manipulate me with the very love I had for my son. And if there's one thing I can never forgive, it's manipulation. At 3 p.m., Ethan called. His voice was tired, hoarse, and filled with despair. "Mom, I tried getting a favor loan, but the bank rejected me because of my credit score. I called friends, relatives. No one can help us," I asked bluntly. "So, what's your decision?" He sighed heavily, his voice breaking. "We'll take the second option. You pay off the mortgage, and we'll sell the house to you." "But, please, Mom, give us 3 months to find another place," I answered firmly. "No, 2 months. And during those 2 months, you'll pay me a symbolic rent, $500 a month." It wasn't because I needed the money, but because I wanted to set a clear boundary between landlord and tenant. Ethan nodded without arguing. He was too exhausted to fight anymore. We agreed to meet Wednesday at the notary's office to finalize the transfer. Tuesday, I handled all the paperwork, went to the bank to settle their debts, met with my attorney to make sure everything was legally sound. I started thinking about what I'd do with the house that was about to be mine. The truth was, I had no intention of living there. Too many memories, and far too big for a 63-year-old woman living alone. I'd sell it to secure a stable savings cushion for the rest of my life. Wednesday, the sky was gray and heavy, perfectly matching everyone's mood. In the notary's office in Portland, Ethan and Emily looked pale as they signed the papers, as if signing their own sentence. As for me, I felt a strange peace. When the notary said, "The process is complete," I saw Emily's eyes fill with tears, while Ethan just bowed his head, unable to look at anyone. From that moment, I officially became the legal owner of the house they had lived in. Outside the office, Ethan turned to me. His voice choked. Mom, do you really think this is right? Don't you regret taking your sons home? I replied softly, yet firmly. I do have regrets, but not for doing this. I only regret that it took me so long to open my eyes. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. Ethan started calling me every day, not to ask for money, but just to talk. It seemed he had finally realized his mother wasn't a walking wallet. Emily, on the other hand, did the opposite. She avoided me completely. Every time I stopped by to check documents or politely remind them that the house now belonged to me, she'd just lower her head without saying a word. The respect I had waited years for had finally arrived, not born of love, but of fear. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a real estate agency in Portland. A woman on the line said a client was interested in buying Ethan and Emily's house, offering above market price and willing to take over the mortgage. The offer was too good to refuse. With that money, I could buy a smaller, comfortable apartment, and most importantly, secure my financial independence for the rest of my life. I told Ethan about it, explaining that if I accepted the deal, they'd have to move out earlier than planned. He asked, his voice low, "Are you planning to give us a share? You know, to help us start over." I was speechless. After everything, losing the house, losing my trust, being exposed for lying, he still thought he was entitled to a cut. My voice turned cold as I replied, "You'll get exactly what you deserve. Just a little more time to pack." Right then, I understood completely. In my son's eyes, I wasn't a mother, not even a person. I was an endless source of money, and I knew, without a doubt, that my role as the family bank was over for good. I agreed to sell the house. The sale was set to close in 30 days, and Ethan and Emily had to vacate before that date. When I told them my decision, Emily nearly lost her mind. She screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You're heartless! You're destroying this family!" I stayed calm and replied, "The ones who destroyed this family weren't me. It was you two, when you chose to lie, betray, and disrespect me. Now I'm simply reaping what you sowed." Ethan was different. He didn't yell. He just sat quietly, eyes empty. Maybe he finally understood the weight of what he'd done. Or maybe he was already calculating how to squeeze money out of me one last time. Whatever the reason was, one thing was certain: my son finally understood that his mother was no longer the weak woman who endured everything in the name of motherhood. Now, I was a woman who knew how to protect herself, who knew her rights, and was no longer afraid to use them. The last weekend, before they moved out, Ethan came to my apartment. He didn't ask for money, didn't plead, didn't put on a show. He simply said, his voice low and sincere, "I've learned a big lesson. I just hope someday we can rebuild our relationship, but this time based on respect." I looked at my son, and for the first time in years, I caught a glimpse of the man I once tried to raise. Maybe losing the house was exactly what he needed to finally grow up. Maybe, for the first time in my life, I helped my son by saying no instead of yes. I replied, "I hope so too. But if we start over, it has to be built on respect, not financial dependence. You'll always be welcome as a son, not as someone draining his mother dry." When Ethan left that afternoon, I felt both sadness and relief. Sadness for the love that once existed between us, but relief because, at last, I had found myself again a woman who values herself and knows when to say enough. The following week, the sale of the house was finalized. With the money, I bought a beautiful two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon. For the first time in decades, I had financial security and, more importantly, peace. No more being used, deceived, or disrespected. It was just me, and, as it turned out, that was more than enough. 6 months have passed since I moved into my new apartment. 6 months of freedom, something I never thought I'd experience at 63. Every morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, sit by the window, watch the sunlight spill over the street, and feel nothing but gratitude because I had the courage to change my life. My new apartment is a small dream come true. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a modern kitchen, and a balcony where I sit and watch people passing by. Every piece of furniture was chosen by me. Every corner reflects who I truly am. But the biggest change wasn't the place I lived, it was the relationship between me and myself. For years, I had only defined myself as Ethan's mom, the caretaker, the sacrificer, the one who lived for others. Now, I was simply Teresa, a woman who had rediscovered her own strength. I began to travel. Not luxurious trips, but short getaways within the state's small historic towns I'd always dreamed of visiting. In each place, I bought a small gift for myself, like a child being rewarded with a new toy. That feeling of freedom, I hadn't felt it in decades. 3 months after I moved, Ethan started reaching out to me more often. At first, I was cautious, thinking he might need money again. But this time was different. He genuinely wanted to rebuild our bond. Our conversations changed, completely calm, honest, and without any hidden motives. He told me that after losing the house, their lives became difficult. They had to move to a small apartment in the suburbs, far from work. Emily fell into depression and even talked about divorce. It was then that Ethan truly understood the real consequences of his actions. Ironically, that crisis made them both grow up. Ethan got promoted after finally learning responsibility. Emily went back to school, taking a skincare technician program so she could earn her own income. For the first time, they were living within their means. Ethan apologized to me, not just with words, but with actions. He began to take real responsibility for what he'd done. He told me that for years, he'd seen me only as a source of money, never realizing the silent sacrifices I had made. That losing the house was the most painful, yet most valuable lesson of his life. I was truly moved. In his eyes, I saw again a glimpse of the honest man I had always hoped he would become. But I also knew words were easy. True change had to be proven over time. So I set a clear boundary. We could meet, talk, and rebuild our bond, but financial dependence was over forever. If Ethan wanted respect, he had to earn it with his own life. 4 months after selling the house, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Emily. Her voice was different, softer, sincere, without the usual arrogance. She said she wanted to meet me, that she had something important to share. We met at a small cafe in Portland, near my apartment. When Emily arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner, wearing simple jeans and a sweater, with no expensive jewelry in sight. But in her eyes, there was something new maturity. She began with a heartfelt apology. She admitted that she had pressured Ethan to live beyond his means, that she had lied and mistreated the only person who had ever truly helped her. She said losing the house had been the reality check she needed to wake up. But what surprised me most were the real changes in their lives. They were slowly paying off their debts, living within their means, and planning their future realistically. Emily had sold all her designer clothes, handbags, and accessories, using the money to pay off what they owed. Then, she said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Teresa, You did the right thing back then. I used to hate you, thought you were cruel, but now I understand it was the best thing that could have happened to us. We were heading straight for self-destruction without realizing it. We talked for more than 2 hours. Emily shared their new dreams, smaller, but more realistic. They wanted to buy a small apartment of their own within 5 years and have children only when they were financially stable. Now, they were building a life based on reality, not illusion. When we said goodbye, I felt as if I hadn't just regained a son, but also a daughter-in-law. Emily had become a mature, responsible woman who finally understood the value of things, and the best part was, she had done it through her own effort, not through anyone's lectures. Last month, Ethan and Emily invited me to dinner at their new apartment. It was small and simple, but cozy and neatly arranged. Emily cooked herself. Not anything extravagant, just a warm, loving meal, perfectly within their means. During dinner, Ethan opened his laptop and showed me a budget spreadsheet he'd made. He said he'd learned to appreciate every dollar and that he never wanted to owe anyone again. Emily added that they had cut out all unnecessary expenses and realized that living simply made them happier. The most emotional moment came when Ethan handed me a small envelope. Inside was $200 and a handwritten note. "Mom, I know I still owe you so much. This is my first payment. Even if it takes years, I want to repay it all, not for the money, but to earn back the trust I lost." I cried, not because of the small amount, but because of what it meant. Ethan finally understood that our relationship could only be rebuilt if he took responsibility for his actions. I accepted the money not because I needed it, but because I knew it marked his step toward maturity. I said, "Next time you give me money, let it be because you want to share your happiness, not because you're trying to make up for the past." Now, our relationship is completely different. Ethan calls me, often but never to ask for anything. He talks about his work, his plans, and little moments from his day. It's the relationship between a grown son and a respected mother, not between a dependent and a provider. Emily has changed completely, too. She includes me in their family plans, asks for my opinion before making big decisions, and treats me with genuine respect and affection. And most importantly, this connection comes naturally, not from any self-interest. Recently, they brought me news that filled my heart with pure joy. Emily is pregnant. I'm going to be a grandmother. But this time, the happy news came with a mature conversation. They told me they wanted to raise their child on their own, without relying financially on anyone, that they had been saving for baby supplies, carefully planning their expenses, and wanted to set an example of responsibility from the very beginning. Listening to them, I simply smiled, not because I was proud of what I had lost, but because I was happy for what I had helped them find: self-respect, maturity, and real love. When I left Ethan and Emily's home that evening, I walked slowly down the quiet suburban street in Portland where they lived and thought about my own journey. I had lost a dependent son, but gained back a grown man. I had lost a selfish daughter-in-law, but gained back a woman who appreciated life. I had lost money, but regained my dignity. The best part was that this transformation rippled through every part of my life. In my evening art class, I met wonderful people, friends who made me laugh sincerely for the first time in years. During short trips across Oregon, I rediscovered the adventurous spirit I had once forgotten. And in my small apartment, I found the peace I had spent years sacrificing everything to find. I even reconnected with old friends, people I had neglected because I was too busy worrying about Ethan. My old coworker, Margaret, told me I look completely different, that I seem lighter, younger, at least 10 years. And she was right. I truly felt younger. Because when you stop carrying the weight of someone else's life, you finally have the time and energy to live your own. When you stop being just a part of someone else, you finally discover who you really are. Sometimes I still wonder if I was too harsh on Ethan. But then, when I see the honest man he has become, the solid marriage he is building, and the way he prepares to become a father with responsibility, planning, and real love, I know I did the right thing. Ethan learned that every action has consequences, that respect cannot be bought with money, and that love cannot survive without reciprocity. And he could only learn those lessons by facing the real consequences of his own choices. Now, whenever I share this story with women who have been used, disrespected, or taken for granted by their children, I always tell them, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. It's never too late to demand respect. And it's never too late to teach others how to treat you. My silence that day when I discovered the secret party I'd been excluded from was the beginning of a great transformation, not just for me, but for my whole family. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them take responsibility for their own choices. Now, as I stand by the window of my little apartment, watching the sunset wash over the city rooftops, my heart is filled with gratitude. Ethan has learned to be a man, Emily has learned to be a woman, and I finally have learned to be myself. Life has truly come full circle, and the most beautiful part is this: we all won. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events, with names and locations changed to protect privacy. But perhaps, somewhere in it, you see a reflection of yourself, a mother, a child, or someone who had to learn to let go, to find peace. Teresa chose silence to face her pain, but sometimes silence is the strongest way to speak. And you, in her place, would you stay silent or speak up? Whatever path you choose, believe that God always blesses honest and brave hearts, even if healing comes with pain first. Thank you for watching until the end. Stay with us and choose one of the 2 videos on the screen, because the next story might touch your heart too.